episode of Surviving the Survivor. We bring you the best guests in all of true crime. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning broadcaster, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to another live episode of Surviving the Survivor. It is the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in all of true crime. And today we are discussing yet another pretty sordid and disturbing story. This has got a lot of Diddy vibes. We're going to get to it in 1 minute. Some people might be thinking, well, why are you doing 5,000 shows a day? I made a commitment along with Steve Cohen and the COE and Space Coast and the mods to bring you breaking news. And right when I made that commitment, there's been nonstop breaking news. It has not stopped. But typically for those who are new or going to be watching for the first time, we do a nightly show that is civilized like this one. And then we will be doing breaking news just kind of by the seat of our pants during the day when things break, which again, they've been doing nonstop. But today we are talking really about the victims here, but unfortunately it's these guys who get the spotlight. Typically you're looking at Orrin and Alone Alexander, Orrin in the red. They've got a brother, Tal Alexander. They've all been charged with really hideous crimes. And I was told it was a cousin. The media, a lot of media outlets had it as their cousin, but there is a fourth person who I'm now hearing is just a friend of the family. His name is Ohad Fisherman, and he is reportedly on his way back from his honeymoon in Japan. Sure, his bride-to-be is going to be thrilled to know that he's going to be locked up promptly upon his return, if he ever does in fact return. So these are the Alexander brothers who made a name for themselves in the real estate business. And, you know, if there's anything at all to their credit, which doesn't seem like there's much, it's that they at least built a pretty lucrative business despite coming from a very wealthy family and a father who's a great businessman. They took it on their own. The dad owns Kent Security. Some of the new news, and we're going to dive into it. A new victim has come forward. I guess that's redundant to say new news, but it's like me personally, which drives me crazy. But anyway, there is news to be discussed, and a victim has now come forward since their arrest, which is important. Without further ado, though, I'm a fan. I told him on the X, formerly known as Twitter, but he's also, you'll see this guy everywhere. He is ubiquitous on cable TV, court TV. Rich Schoenstein, he's a partner and vice chair at Tarter, Crinchy, and Drogan. He's a trial lawyer, a litigator. He handles civil disputes. He's been doing it for more than 30 years. Guy is a top-notch attorney coming to us from New York City. Then you've got Dwayne Cates down here. He's been on the show once before. It's funny because the first time I said he's from Wyoming, Arizona, and I was like, I lived in Arizona, never heard of a town called Wyoming, but he's from the state of Wyoming and lives in Arizona, and that's where his criminal defense practice is. And then you've got Tom Smith, man, who's been on the show quite a bit since multiple stories, but specifically Luigi Mangione broke. Tom is the co-host of the Gold Shields podcast. He's a retired NYPD detective, and Dwayne is probably taking a call. He's a retired NYPD detective and has his own business. There you go. You're back, Dwayne.
I didn't do anything. It just went. Apparently, it just didn't like me for a second.
Yeah, so you can't trust technology. So the charges here, Rich Schoenstein, they're facing federal charges of conspiracy to commit sex trafficking and sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. It goes back to 2010. They've got evidence already, text messages, videos, photos, testimony. And now we're going to get into this in a little more detail. The FBI special agent in charge of this, who is a woman and should be, FBI special agent Justine Atwood, she testified saying, look, more than 40 people have come forward and they are credible. First, Rich, to these charges, both state and federal. And by the way, the state charges have to do with SAs. We don't say the word here on YouTube, and R, you know what the gang are. But Rich, these are some of the, outside of murder, I guess, these are some of the most serious charges What's your kind of bird's eye view of this case? And it's headed back to New York City probably, but what do you think so far of these guys' chances? It looks like they're pretty cooked.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm a firm believer in innocent until proven guilty. So I always want to see the trial. I want to see the evidence. I want to hear from witnesses. But in terms of the seriousness of the allegation, you referenced Diddy. That's the first thing I thought of when I heard this. It seems like the same kind of thing in a different world, but it sounds like men with too much money and too much power taking advantage of it and committing just heinous crimes on a number of innocent people. I mean, it sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's horrific. And I do live in Miami, originally from New Jersey, and we know a lot of people in this area who know them, and no one has a good thing to say about them, to be honest. So a lot of people are not surprised, which is kind of the scary part of all this. Let me get this straight: the friend cousin on his honeymoon. This is an Alone or Oren's wife. It's Oren's wife in the red here, and yes, he asked the judge here to let him out because his wife is due any day. That's not happening. They were granted bail, by the way, but they have federal charges, so they are stuck in there. Tom Smith, to you, again, hideous crimes. I know you guys as detectives and investigators take this stuff personally. How delicately, I guess, do you have to go about when you're dealing with these types of sex crimes? A lot of women did not come forward because they said that they were embarrassed or afraid. Now, when civil suits were filed over the summer, they started to come forward. From your standpoint as an investigator, how do you approach this?
Well, sensitive is right. I mean, you got to do it right. You got to do it methodically. But in my, opinion, in my experience, once you start the process going and these victims start seeing more victims, come forward and be comfortable with coming forward, more is going to happen. With this, if there's one, there's many more. And that's going to be the case here. Like I've said on your show before, Joel, just because the investigation, you got these guys, the investigation doesn't stop. It's going to continue and it keeps going. And that's specifically for more witnesses to come forward and more charges possibly to come forward. When the Southern District of New York is involved in this, that's the monster in this country. And when they get their claws into a case, that's a big one.
Yeah, and it looks like that is happening as we speak. Speaking of the SDNY, Dwayne, to you. So state charges were filed against just these two, not the brother or the friend / cousin, but we'll call him a friend. And again, they are related to SAs committed back in 2016, 2017, and 2021. And they also include allegations of gang, you know what. How does this intersect with the federal charges? And from a legal perspective, will these sort of take a back seat to the feds? Because these guys were granted bail by a circuit judge, but not a federal judge. So apparently they're, in custody until they're handed over to U.S. Marshals, who hand them over to the feds, I guess.
Well, the state charges were filed so that they could get them off the streets, quickly. Okay, so they can pop them, they can get them off the streets. It's not surprising that the New York judge gave them bail because that's what they do there. But that's why they also have the federal case, rolling at the same time. So now they're going to get extradited to the feds. The feds are going to handle this case, okay? And unless something strange happens and they don't get convicted in the federal case, they always have the state case holding over their heads. And they still may even do that even if they do get convicted. But the feds are going to take the lead because, quite frankly, the feds do a much better job of investigating these kinds of things. And their evidence is they have more resources and they have more experience. And they're really good at putting these cases together.
Yeah. By the way, so this guy, Ohad Fisherman, who is a friend who coincidentally lives in the same building as my dear beloved mother, he is reportedly on a honeymoon in Japan again. So he's on his way back, and they say he's going to surrender. I'll, believe it once I see it, but that is what they are saying right now. Rich, to you, on Friday, there was kind of a mini little trial / hearing on the federal level. And this FBI agent, she took the stand and basically, testified on behalf of the federal government, saying these guys are involved in sex trafficking. She went on to say that she's interviewed more than 40 women again since June. And it was her belief that these are all credible allegations. I mean, what does that do for the case in terms of having an FBI agent, a federal agent coming forward and saying this under sworn testimony in a courtroom?
Well, it doesn't really do anything for the ultimate disposition of the case. What an FBI agent believes or doesn't believe isn't really even admissible evidence in front of a jury. It's offered, in front of a judge to talk about the status of a case, or maybe to talk about bail, or maybe to talk about the sufficiency of the charges and the basis for the charges. But it's not really evidence. What's going to matter is, if the case goes to trial in federal or state court or both, what does a jury think of the evidence? What does a jury think of those witnesses, be it 40 witnesses or fewer or more witnesses, depending on what they can get?
I'm looking at a comment that caught my attention for Tom. Tom, I'll come to you in a minute, but Dwayne, back to you here. Likelihood of bail on the federal charges. So Tall, who's in the middle on that top photo, and on the left, on the right photo, if that's not too confusing. So on the photo on the right, he is on the left, to confuse you again. But they're asking about the likelihood of bail on the federal charges. With that said, they have a new high-powered Miami attorney. I'm going to get to him in a moment. Is there any chance that any one of these three is going to get out on bail on a federal level?
I mean, it is possible. In the federal system, you basically have a detention hearing, and the court can detain somebody without bail if they make the proper findings. And it sounds to me like that these defendants have the ability to flee. They have the money, they have the time, they have the resources, they have private jets. They can go wherever they want. The problem is nowadays, when you try to run, everything's done by facial recognition. You're not going to get very far. I mean, it's unless you change your face, you're not getting very far. I mean, I traveled to Europe. You don't even show your passport anymore. You just walk up, stick your face in the camera. And so, they'll find them if they run, but still the judge is going to find that the nature of the charges and the fact that they have the means and opportunity to flee probably going to detain them.
Yeah,
at least the main players.
And flight or taking off here is a whole other issue that came up. And the father, I'm not sure about the mother, are Israeli. So there's worry that they would go to Israel, and there's debate about the extradition process from Israel. We'll get to that in a moment. But Tom, to you from Beachside Boomer, it's a great question. I think a lot of people wonder this, but I think you have a different take on it because of what you did for a living. These guys are both handsome and can walk in a bar every night and have consensual sex, but they chose this route. How could this go on for so long? In your experience when you're handling sex crimes, Tom, I mean, these are, very good looking guys, obviously very wealthy. They've got quote unquote, everything going for them. What is it that you think drives them to commit these crimes as opposed to just having healthy relationships? They could be anywhere in the world, do anything they want. Now they've destroyed their lives. They've destroyed the lives of at least 40 women, probably a whole lot more. And this baby, or maybe there's at least 2 who are pregnant. These kids coming into the world now who are very likely not going to have a father and going to have a very mentally challenging upbringing because of them.
Power, privilege. That's it. That's what it is. It's a power trip. They can get away with it. And they think that, this went on for so long because they just continued to do it. Now, not that the investigation and, they were on them, and watching them, but they just figured they get away with it, of who they are, the notoriety that they have, become. and they just think they're going to get away with it. And it's a power trip. It's control, it's power, and they're predators. That's all they are. They may dress nice, they may be on nice boats and live in nice houses, but it comes down to them just being absolute predators.
I mean, I know you just said this, but you think it is just like a power trip for them, an ego trip? Do you think that I've heard, and it's not corroborated, so I don't even really want to say it, but I'm about to, is that I've heard that their father is an interesting character. I mean, you think these are learned behaviors?
I think it's just what they became and the level of notoriety that they have become, and just thinking they can get away with it. You know, relationships take time. They don't want that. They just want quick, let me get this done. And it becomes just a predator way of thinking. And that's what it is. It's just hunting these women. And that's what they did. You know, whether it was having conversations with them and throwing around the money and throwing around the trips and all that, it all leads down the same road. No matter how you get there, it all leads down the same road of just being an absolute horrific predator.
Yeah.
Can I chime in on that?
Please, Rich. Yes.
So I totally agree with everything Tom just said. You know, the question was, can't these guys just walk into a bar and have sex? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this is not about sex.
Right.
These are not people who wanted to have sex, so they kidnapped women and got them intoxicated. It has very little to do with sex. We think of it as a sex crime, but it's a violent act of power and really violence, overtaking a person, dominating a person. I agree with all of that. I think power is the key word here. That's what they're exercising when they do this activity like that. And that's why I think it has very little to do. I mean, they're not out looking for love and they happen to do this to 40 women. That's not what it's about, right? Also, they have wives, they have families, they have children. They should be fulfilled, but they have to do this other stuff. And if it's true, it's a real sickness.
Yeah. And by the way, when all the Diddy news was breaking and you're hearing that he's allegedly been with these men, I immediately called my mom, who's a licensed therapist, and my mom, and she's like, it's not about the sex, it's about the control and the power. So I agree with Rich and I agree with Tom. In this case, I have a feeling it is the same thing. But Rich, I wanted to ask you this question. So in these cases, you know, sadly, you always get the question, well, what took so long? Well, obviously, it's hard to get people to come forward if they're fearful. You've got really powerful people. But then on the investigative side or the prosecutorial side, you see here, this person is kind of taking jabs at the SDNY with Epstein, the Abercrombie CEO, Harvey Weinstein. Is there something to be said about the time it takes to bring these cases to fruition?
Well, it would be good if they could bring them sooner, but one of the other guys paid a compliment to the Southern District of New York prosecutor's office, which I agree with. That's a very serious office. And one thing they don't do is bring cases they don't think they can win. And that means not only do they have to think they're right, they have to think they have the evidence. They have to think they will be able to prove it in a court. And that doesn't mean 100% of the time they do, but they think they do. And these cases are really hard to prove because, you know, it's a he said, she said, for lack of a better term, in terms of what went on in a closed room where we don't have another witness and we don't have any kind of photographic evidence. What tips the scales maybe is when there are so many she's or other victims who are saying the same thing over and over and over again. They can feel empowered that there are more of them, but it really empowers the case. So I don't blame a prosecutor's office for wanting to make sure they have it right before they go after very powerful people. That's the way to do it, I think.
Yeah, and by the way, on the federal level, it's like Rich, like a 97 or 98% conviction rate. So they usually do have their ducks in a row there. Thank you, Courtroom Confidential. Josh and Tiff, good friends of mine. They've got an amazing podcast, Courtroom Confidential. Please check it out. And they just gifted 5 Surviving the Survivor memberships. So thank you. And here's Matthew Reese. Looks like he's paying in pounds. So not American, but we love that. These individuals have been engaging in nefarious activities for quite some time. What recent event finally compelled the authorities to intervene? There were 4 civil lawsuits filed in the summer, and then a flood, the proverbial floodgates opened up. And again, about 40 women came forward. This makes my heart melt. Looks, I think they're ugly. There you go. Do no harm. How about that? So hang on a sec. Dwayne just disappeared on us. I think he might be getting a call. Dwayne, you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I don't know why my camera. There we go.
There you go.
Might be because you're getting a call. But so Dwayne,
No, I'm not on my phone. It's on my computer. It's not my phone. So it's, for some reason, maybe my camera's not plugged in good enough or something. It says my camera's unplugged. But
well, you know, they said that aliens were in Las Vegas, which is not far from Phoenix. So
well, I'm a defense attorney, so they'll do anything to keep me from, having my say.
Yeah.
Being police officers and stuff always wanting to shut me up.
So when this indictment was unsealed, one of the terms they used to describe these guys are serial sexual predators. So it just is a pretty good descriptor of these guys. Now back to Dwayne, back to the federal charges related to Tal, who again is not either of these two. He's short-haired guy and shorter, but his attorneys came out at his hearing on Friday in federal court, and they said that they want to address FBI statements and prosecutors' claims of this idea that there's no extradition. But prior to all that, they said, look, we need to reopen the detention hearing. They want their guys free. And we'll get into the specifics of that in a second, but will they, I mean, kind of asked you this question already, but what do they have to show in order to see, a glimmer of the outside before this potential trial that we're anticipating?
Well, first of all, I've never met anybody that was detained that didn't want to get out. Okay. So they're in their lawyer's ears saying, get me out of here. And so, and once you have a detention hearing, they usually happen pretty quickly. Okay. Like right after they get into the federal custody, they have a detention hearing. And it's my policy usually to try to delay it for a week or two until I've actually had some time to look at what's going on in the case before I have one. But let's say they had one and they were detained. So now the lawyer can ask to have another one, but there has to be some new evidence, something new that the judge didn't already hear in order to talk a judge into letting you have a second bite at the apple. So what they got to do is they've got to show that there's something that wasn't brought forward at the first detention hearing in order to have a second one.
And that's definitely what they're working on, for sure. This is, I think, accurate. They were raised to believe that they were untouchable. I pretty sure that there's some of that in all of this. Now, they had a defense attorney who I guess still working with them. This is for Tal now, Milton Williams. And Tom, this is not a legal question, but what he was basically inferring in court, he said that they had quote unquote friendly contact. Now, it is a job of a defense attorney to say stuff like this, but the obvious implication is that it was consensual, that the women wanted to take part in this. So obviously they have a job to do. But when you've got 40 women, and I've said this before, where there's smoke, there's fire. But again, in your own experience, in terms of investigating sex crimes or detectives that who have, number one, it's obviously true that women are fearful to come forward. But again, to Rich's point, this is really tough to prove in a court of law. So what do you have to, as an investigator, what do you have to get out of these victims in order to make the case?
Yeah. And just going on what Rich said, the biggest part when you're dealing with so many people, like let's just say 40 for right now, detectives and DAs or U.S. attorneys are going to go through each and every interview to pick out all the similarities, whether how small it may be, and that adds up after a while. And if they're all in one kind of basket and all having the same type of story with the same details at the same time, whatever it might be, those are what's going to be picked out. And that's the tough part for a defense to go through with. This one said this one said this. If all of them are have a similar story and the way this all took place and went down, that's what the prosecution is going to bank on.
Yeah, and Tom, how common is it? There was someone right here, Silver Fox, not to be confused with Anderson Cooper. They threaten their victims with violence if they report the abuse. Do you hear that frequently?
Oh God, yeah, that's a norm. I mean, that's out of the just predator playbook. They just check that box. They all do that, and not just SAs. That's criminality at its best. Either way, robberies, burglaries, anything like that.
Courtroom Confidential. He is a prosecutor of the year, raising a question we've already asked, but it's interesting that it's coming from, unless it's his wife, Tish, but Tiff. I'm sorry, not Tish. Tiff. Why do you think it took so long for the feds to put this case together? You heard Rich kind of give an answer on that. You got to get your ducks in a row and make sure you're going to get a conviction. So, I mean, Rich, back to you on this. Tal again, who is this guy? If I could pull it up here. Hang on one sec for me. Tal is this one. He's the guy with the short hair and the brown suit, looking very Miami-esque. But he's now hired, Rich, a guy named Howard Srebnick. He's a very high-profile lawyer down here. I don't know if you know of him. His clients include Jeffrey Epstein, Justin Bieber, and a lot of other high-profile clients. He immediately filed a motion. He wasted no time to reopen Tal Alexander's detention hearing and stay removal. So obviously he's wrangling right away, trying to position himself. And you heard Dwayne say he's got to come with something new. So what does he need to come with to get these guys at least released temporarily right now?
Well, the question of whether or not you release a criminal defendant on these kind of charges is up to the discretion of the judge. So the first thing you're going to have to show is that there's not an excessive risk that they flee. And that's a problem with these guys because they're rich. They have connections in other countries. There's some concern that if they get out of jail, they're going to keep going. And obviously the judge isn't going to release them. Also, sometimes in cases, you can persuade a judge that the evidence isn't all that great or the allegations aren't all that severe. Now, you don't have that in this case either, and that gets back to your question, Joel, about why is the prosecutor or the investigator, the FBI investigator, going on to testify about how good the evidence is. Part of that is to make the judge aware of how strong the case is, so the judge is inclined to keep them in jail. Remember, this case is not just assault. This is a coordinated conspiracy to commit multiple assaults, including transporting victims across state lines into secret places to commit violent crimes against them, and then to cover up the tracks, and including, we just touched on it, coercing the witnesses not to say anything. So you have conspiracy concerns, you have flight concerns, you have witness tampering concerns. I'd be shocked if these guys got out, to tell you the truth. I don't see it.
Yeah, I
and
hope
to build
not.
on that, that it's charged as a conspiracy for a reason, so that they can bring all 40 of these witnesses in the same trial. Okay. Instead of trying to do 40 separate trials and decide whether each one. Now, if I was a defense attorney, I would be trying to bifurcate this trial. They're not going to have any luck depending on how similar each one of these events are. But in a conspiracy trial, it all comes in together, and you get where there's smoke, there's fire, and juries convict for that. And that's something that you're going to see a big fight about, trying to separate out some of this.
Yeah, and Tom, forgive me, because I got a couple of legal questions back to back. But you just mentioned the 40 potential victims here, trying them all at once. Could it be a different variable? Like, could it be like the 7 maybe strongest victims in terms of the evidence that they have? Could we see that? Then what would happen to the other victims? Dwayne, you want to take that, or Rich, take that one?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, it depends how strong the individual cases are. So each individual case, if you're the prosecutor, you're going to assess the victim, how strong their testimony is, how compelling a victim is. You might weed out victims who have, I hate to say this, but you might weed out victims who have their own troubled histories that you don't want to deal with. You might weed out victims where there's not a lot of corroborating evidence, because you want to get in circumstances where you can have a victim tell their story and it can be corroborated by some sort of circumstantial evidence. We know the brothers were there that day. Somebody has a plane ticket, something that can tie it together. So you want those, and you want to present the most compelling cases as sort of your lead cases. But I also think if you're the prosecutor here, you want to present as many as possible, because there's real strength in numbers. So I think you're only going to weed out ones that aren't as strong. And I think Dwayne's right. It's a conspiracy case to keep all the victims in the same trial, but also to keep all the defendants in the same trial, because otherwise each of these defendants would be saying, it's not fair to try me alongside my brother. I need a separate trial. And you want to, if you're the prosecutor, you want to do this as efficiently as possible.
By the way, best guest in true crime. It is not a tagline. It is our reality. You're seeing why. I got some of the top attorneys, retired NYPD detective who investigated sex crimes, Steve Cohen, bringing it day in, day out. COE, Space Coast, the mods. Can't do it without the team here. This is an interesting question, and I'm going to get to what's on the screen here from Jerry Michael, who is a friend of the show, been here a long time. Tom, I know you're not a psychologist, but you're going to play one now because you're a NYPD guy. So do they think, in your mind's eye, do you think that these guys think that they're not really doing anything wrong, that it's just a game, or it's just like, it's okay because we're rich? What do you think is going on inside their little pea brains?
Yeah, I could certainly see that. We're meeting girls. That's what they're going to say, and we had a elaborate way to do so, and that's going to be what they're going to say. Yeah, did we promise them a trip? Yeah, okay, but we didn't really give it to them. They'll come up with the wildest out of the box thinking to justify what they're doing. And I don't think that's going to work in the end, but in their mind, and it just shows how far it went and how long it went, and then not thinking anything was wrong with it. You would hope as a human being, as a man, something's going to click at some point, going, all right, wait, hold on, we got to stop this. This is getting to a level of criminality and bad. And they didn't. One thinking they were going to get away with it, that they're privileged as hell and there was no problem with it, and them thinking in their, like you just said, little pea minds, that there was no problem with this.
They're going to come out and they're going to say that these were all consensual acts. We're rich, good looking guys, and we offered these girls trips. They came, they knew what they were getting into. And then they're also going to say, because this started with 4 civil cases, they're going to say it's all about the money. This is all about the money. These women are coming forward because they see an opportunity to get our money. And that's what they're doing. This was all consensual, and it's all about the money. And don't look at what's going on over here, because this is about the money. And that's going to be the defense. You watch.
Yeah. Excellent point. 100% agree that that's probably where it is headed. From a defense side, Patricia Burns, friend of the show, been here a long time. My dad would be proud of you for using such big words. Avaricious megalomaniacs. If you don't know, you got to look it up. Or if you don't know, now you know, I guess is how it goes. But this is the motion that this guy, Howard Srebnick, if I'm saying it correctly, filed right away. Again, he's a Miami attorney who represented Jeffrey Epstein, Justin Bieber, and others. In the motion, he says the government, Rich here, says the government failed to produce evidence required under the Jenks Act, which mandates disclosure of statements made by witnesses. Alexander was not afforded afforded a meaningful opportunity to address concerns about his family's financial resources. This is his clientele, by the way. The claim that Alexander is not extraditable from Israel is unequivocally false. There's some debate, I guess, that if you're Jewish and you flee to Israel, that they won't extradite you. I've heard that is not the case, but that's what he's arguing here. What do you make of these 3 points, Rich? And does anything like jump out at you?
No, I mean, these seem like pretty weak sauce, to tell you the truth. I mean, obviously the government's got to turn over witness statements on whatever schedule is set. I don't know if that's been done. I don't know if it's timely, but the cure for that is to turn over the statements. If statements haven't been turned over, it's not to let someone out of jail. I don't know, the theme here is that the defendants have resources that make them a flight risk. I don't understand why we need more specifics about it. That seems to be self-evident. Whether or not he would be extradited if he was in Israel, also to me, is sort of besides the point. The point is fundamental. He has the means to leave the country. He has contacts outside of the United States, and that's a risk if you let the guy out of jail. That's it. I don't need to quibble about whether or not he could be extradited. If we get to the point where the guy's been let out of jail on bail and we have to worry about whether or not he can be extradited, we have a problem, right?
Yeah. Well, look, Rich, let me ask you a bigger legal question. This is much more like philosophical, theoretical, and probably be better asked of I don't know, either like a legal scholar, like we have Professor Joe Patuto on, or maybe a philosopher. But I know myself, like I would have a very hard time defending these guys because when there's 40 plus women, and this is, I think, the tip of the iceberg, you got to start thinking to yourself, there's something there, right? And I would say to myself, got 2 daughters, got a son. This is probably one of the worst things you could do to another person. How do you square it as a criminal defense attorney here to go ahead like this guy, Howard Srebnick? And I mean, everyone deserves a vigorous defense. You can tell yourself that, but then there's sometimes there are these defendants that roll around where in your heart of hearts that maybe they're not the best people or well-intentioned people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you start with what you just said. Everyone's entitled to a vigorous defense. And if we don't get everybody a vigorous defense, then the system we have falls apart. The system only works if we have prosecutors who are good at their job and bring the cases, and defense lawyers who are good at their job and challenge the proof offered by prosecutors, and judges who are good at their job controlling a courtroom, and jurors who do the right thing and are good at their job and consider the evidence and render a decision. So we need lawyers who are willing to represent even guys allegedly like this. Now, a lot of people won't do it. I don't think I could do it, to tell you the truth. Mm-hmm. And if you don't think you can do it, then you shouldn't do it because they need zealous advocates. So I'm glad there are people out there that can do it. It's a different choice than some might make. There's a lot of different things you can do when you sign up to be a lawyer. You can do public interest stuff. You can represent corporations. You can represent people accused of crimes. You can go into the government and represent the people, and everybody's got to make a pick of what they want to do.
Black Widow, Dwayne, hang on one sec. Black Widow, friend of the show from the Republic of Ireland, lest you think we are not a global show. By the way, shout out to Bob from Bell Harbor, promised him that. I'd hate for my son to know what happened to me. Everyone knowing strength of these victims for this gauntlet they will face. Go ahead. Dwayne, did not mean to cut you off.
I'm pretty passionate about this because my philosophy is the worst of the worst needs the best defense attorney. Okay. For a simple reason. Okay. If the worst of the worst has the best attorney and they get convicted, they stay convicted. Okay. And so the defense attorney's job isn't to get people off. Okay. My job is to be the police's police. I police the police. I make sure that the police do their job correctly. I make sure they don't take shortcuts. I make sure that they're not stomping on people's constitutional rights. Okay. And that's what the criminal defense attorney's job is. My job, people say you get people off on a technicality. No, I don't. I got people off because an officer screwed up and did something wrong. Okay. That's not a technicality. That's a constitutional violation. Okay. And I think if you're going to call yourself a criminal defense attorney, you have to take any criminal case that comes. There's not a criminal case that I will not take, because I defend the Constitution of the United States. I don't defend specific crimes. I defend people, and everybody deserves a vigorous defense. And I think that you have to have that mentality. I've had attorneys that worked for me that said they wouldn't do X, Y, and Z, and I fired them because they're not that's not. I'm a criminal defense firm. That's what I do.
Don't fire Rich, but you can fire
I won't fire
anybody
Rich.
else.
Rich can stay on.
I'm putting Dwayne on my list next time I get arrested. I know who I'm calling.
I know.
Well, you know what? That's correct. You need somebody like that. And I tell officers, and police officers love me, because I tell them, if you do your job correctly, you've got nothing to fear from me. I will not be rude to you. I will not, try to trick you. Okay. But if you're lying and cheating, you better duck and cover, because I'm coming after you.
Good. I mean, I like the fact that you're upholding the United States Constitution. Guy next to you there, Tom, he swore to protect and serve. So there's these bedrocks of our society that makes America a great place. By the way,
it makes the system work.
Yeah. By the way, your earlier thing, I totally agree with you. They're gonna say it's all a ploy to get at their money, but I think that people see through that now. And my contention is, where there's smoke, there's fire. But we'll see how that plays out. But Tom, other victims in this, we always talk about the ripple effect of victims, is again going to be these guys' future children that are about to be born into this crazy world, made crazier by them. But also the wives, they're victims here. But do you think that the wives, everyone that I've talked to knew the kind of guys these were? Let's put it that way. Do you think these wives did, or do you think that these guys were able to compartmentalize in a way that like a serial killer does, and could turn it on and turn it off?
Great point. And I think that's what it is. There's a personal, and then there's a business, and they made the acts that they committed the business, and their personal lives are just that. A lot's going to go into whether it was done yet or not, interviews of the wives, of comings and goings, conversations, all that. But I just think that's what it was. You just hit it. Is personal, and then there's business. And just real quick, I just want to address something Dwayne just said real fast. Defense attorneys like Dwayne make detectives better. They really do, because no detective wants to get on the stand and be embarrassed. So when you have someone that, is on the other side of, or the other table, that is on point, makes you better, makes you do your work better, makes you pay attention to details better, and your testimony better. So I always credited good defense attorneys, and it was never personal. It was the job, it was business. And like Dwayne said, if you did your job right, you had nothing to worry about on the stand.
And I see a comment from Sharon here who says, well, the wives might not care because these guys have a lot of money, but trust me.
I was just going to say that too.
I don't know.
And to Tom's point, I've had a lot of officers after trials come up and shake my hand and tell me that they learned more about how to do their job from me than they ever learned in the academy. Newer officers, they said, I made so many mistakes, I will never make those mistakes again.
So back to this, Rich, back to this extradition from Israel, this issue. This guy, Howard Srebnick, in his motion continued. Here's a quote. As an initial matter, Israel has an extradition treaty with the United States. Accordingly, Israel will grant extradition where an individual has been charged or convicted of a felony, and where, like here, the conduct at issue is a criminal offense in both the requesting country and Israel. He goes on to cite multiple legal precedents, and then he says that the FBI themselves, the entity, this lead investigator, Special Agent Atwood, she testified that she did not uncover any information suggesting that they planned or prepared to leave the country. I mean, how how does a judge absorb that? Is it white noise, or does it catch their ear?
Well, the opposite would be bad. Obviously, if there was evidence that they were already planning to flee the country, if that got introduced at a bail hearing, it should probably be game over, because once you know they're in fact planning to jump bail, why would you ever give it to them in a million years? So for a defense lawyer to stand up and say, well, there's no evidence they're planning to skip out on bail, again, I think that's a little weak. I already said I don't care too much about what the extradition rules are. I don't know, by the way. That's not my area of law. I have no idea what it takes to get somebody back from Israel and whether or not they cooperate. But I don't really care. If that's the defense argument, well, you can't show that they're planning to leave. And if they do leave, we can probably get them back. That's not that compelling to me.
Yeah, I agree with you. Jenny here. Tom, this is your wheelhouse here. Am I the only one who thinks it's weird that the three of them got married in 2023? Coincidence, or did they know they were closing in on them? Did they think that they would be like their cover, Tom, and say, "Hey, look, I'm happily married guy. My wife is pregnant. I'm expecting I'm a perfectly normal guy. I was just having fun back then, and I don't know what these people are talking about."
Yeah, that's going to last for about 5 minutes. But it is, a defense, but that's going to get broken down real fast, because it goes back to what you said before. Do they actually think what they're doing is wrong? And it goes back to that. No, here's my wife. Here's my family. We're all good. Yeah. Did we go out and have a good time? Whatever. Yeah. But we didn't do anything wrong. But that could certainly be part of this whole thing. But like I said, that's not going to last too long.
Yeah. Tom, another question. Why would these guys, and I may have asked you this before, so I apologize, and Sean Diddy Combs, who have all the means in the world and private jets that they're on every other week, why didn't these guys take off?
That's a great question. It's hard to answer that. Why didn't they? Scared to show. But again, I'm going to go back to the same thing. We didn't do anything wrong. Taking off shows that, all right, why are they running? Why are they taking off? They must have done something wrong. They must know what they did was wrong. So when you do take off and then you're going to throw the defense of, no, we didn't do anything wrong, we were just having a good time, it's going to be, then why'd you leave? It all kind of has, it's hand in hand. But I think that's more than anything. The perception of taking off is bad.
Yeah. And it's also, I think it's hard, like in theory, like you say, well, I'm going to run off to Bali, but Bali, after a while, if it's not your home, you're not, it's not that easy to roll out. Donna Adelson in our original true crime story tried to make a run for it to Vietnam. She was dumb enough to buy a one-way ticket and they nabbed her. But tell me this isn't true, Dwayne, from Robin Hood. 5 years from now, there will be a trial. Realistically, when will this go to trial if there's not a plea deal cut?
Well, that's probably not an unrealistic expectation. It'll be at least a couple years. And I don't think it'll go to trial at all. It's going to depend on oh shoot, they're coming to get me.
That's New York City. That's New York City. I miss it.
See, here I worry. So, but anyway, this will probably end in some sort of plea deal. Okay. Unless
hold up. What's the deal here? Because these guys could be facing life in prison, right?
Sure. So if they're offered 20, they'll probably take it. They're young enough that they would get out at some point. Okay. Because in the Fed system, going to trial generally isn't a great idea. Okay. It generally isn't. I've done federal trials. I've done federal sex trials. Okay. And they're generally good at what they're generally good at what they do. Okay. And so you've got to be, there's only two reasons you go to trial. There's only two reasons. If you think you can win or you got nothing to lose. That's the only reason you go to trial. So
I have a question for Dwayne.
Yeah.
So if the prosecutors think these guys trafficked and assaulted 40 women, is someone really going to offer them 20 years as a deal?
I don't know. I got 10 years on a federal homicide case.
But that's one victim.
Well, I understand that. Again, you're looking at a 4, 5, 6 month trial. Okay, you're looking at
Right.
massive amounts of resources and time. Okay, if they can lock these guys up relatively quickly, then and then again, then you got in the federal system. Then you're going to got the guy at the very bottom of the totem pole. They're going to go to him and say, hey, if you agree to testify against these guys, we're going to give you a deal. And then then once you get to the point where everybody's pointing the finger at your guy and your guy's the only guy left, okay, then you have to take some sort of plea. It might be 30 years, it might be 40 years, but it might not be life. I mean, again, if you've got nothing to lose, if they're offering him life in prison, you go to trial and you fight it out. You never know. I mean, people, they make mistakes, they screw stuff up, evidence goes, people's memories fade, people decide they don't want to testify. There's a lot of things that can go wrong with a trial that has this many moving parts. And I think the prosecutors will take a plea and get a win.
Yeah. Tom, speaking of fleeing, so this guy, Ohad Fisherman, is reportedly on his way back from Japan on a honeymoon. Do you think he shows up here and turns himself in, or do you think this guy is staying in Japan and just getting to enjoy sushi the rest of his life?
50-50. 50-50. Would I be shocked that he doesn't come back? No, not one bit. But again, is he already talking to a defense attorney? Is he already in conversation with what to do next? Who knows?
Yeah.
What I don't understand is why Bernie Madoff didn't run off. He had hundreds of millions of dollars. He was old. All he had to do was find some obscure country that he could pay off the government to not send him back, and he could have lived out his life in the lap of luxury. Instead, he turned himself in and pled guilty. I just don't get it.
Well, too late for him now. Another scourge on society. Caroline Miller, this interesting question for Rich before we get to it. Well, it's, can you freeze her assets in advance? But now this guy, Tal Alexander, he was denied bail despite Rich she's getting a new neighbor. This guy lives in Carm's building. This guy was denied, listen to this, guys, a $115 million bail package that involved or included real estate assets and other things, citing the severity of the allegations. And with that $115 million, the judge promptly said, you're not getting out. So, I mean, we saw this with Diddy, $150 million with Diddy. I don't think these guys are billionaires, as Diddy was alleged to be, but what does that tell you when $115 million, thank you, Forrest, but what does that tell you when $115 million ain't enough to get you out?
Well, it tells me that the judge thinks the allegations are very severe and that the evidence is there. I mean, I like it. I don't think bail should depend on how big a check the defendant can write. I didn't like that in the Diddy case, and I wouldn't like it here. The idea that if somebody's really, really rich, such that they could afford a conspiracy of trafficking and assault, they can also buy their way out of jail, that doesn't sit well with me. That shouldn't be the test. That shouldn't be a financial transaction to get bail. That's one component. If you put up a sizable amount, that would be security for you to come back. But who knows with guys like this, if 100, and I don't even remember the number, 100 plus million is enough security. What if they have another 100 million sitting in a bank account in some foreign jurisdiction? Yeah. Right? Well, why would that keep them?
And there's a very good chance that is the case. And again, the father started Kent Security, which is a huge private security firm. So, Tom Smith, to you, again, this is back in your wheelhouse more so, I think, but a new victim came forward once these guys were arrested, which takes a lot of courage. And this is really, again, what the story should be about. She spoke and said that it all began with a random, and she spoke, I think, to the FBI agent. I have to double check that. So I don't believe to the media. This is to people in the legal world. So she said what began with a random DM on Instagram from a young up and coming businessman in 2013 ended in the R word, which we don't use on on YouTube. Inside, this is so Miami. Inside the watchtower of the Versace mansion is where it happened. Again, she came forward last week and she says it was Oren, who's the guy in red here. Let me get rid of that comment for you. So this guy in the red is the guy who apparently is the one she is accusing of this. She said he started to get touchy-feely inside the mansion, and then suddenly his brother in the green, he strips naked and decides to go skinny dipping in the middle of the Versace pool. And at that point, it's when Oren invites her up to the Versace watchtower. And if you're wondering why the thumbnail today is just the word possessed, it's because this victim said he was more aggressive, like the look in his eyes was like something possessed him. I really didn't recognize him, but also I was fighting for myself because he's very strong and he pushed me down. I couldn't get up and I was yelling. This is, there you go. This is the direct quote from her. I mean, this is, if true, and again, where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, this is incredibly, predatory behavior. This is a guy who's literally, and by the way, they took away their phones, but he's ushering into a watchtower where no one can see this. I mean, I guess the question is, does any of this surprise you considering the allegations?
No, not one bit. It's just how, they had a game plan of how they enticed girls into this area, the money, glitz, fame, fortune, whatever you want to throw at them. And then, they started their aggressiveness and attacked them. It's heartbreaking, when this happens on any assault like this. But when it's so planned and just methodical and evil in what they're doing, it makes it even worse. And what I said before, you're going to take this descriptive detail of what happened and you're going to match it with other victims. And if the details are the same, that's what's building this case, not just 40 random people. There's going to be similarities in them in the attack, and that's what's going to build this case and keep them where they are.
That's interesting. The similarities in the case. That is really interesting to me. Rich, you see the last paragraph here, and there's more where this came from. It says, "Oh my, I struggled. I tried to push him off. I did anything I could, but unfortunately, he's too strong." And goes on to say he had a smirk on his face from what I can remember. He got up, dressed himself, and left like nothing happened, leaving her on the ground. She says, like a piece of garbage. When she said a smirk on the face, you look at this and look at Oren on the right in the red with a smirk on his face. How powerful is this testimony if this goes to trial? And a guy like this is my own opinion now, he's not going to be able to control himself. Maybe he's smirking in a courtroom in front of a panel of jurors. How damning is this sort of testimony?
Well, it's very damning testimony, and it's extra damning if one of two things happens. One, if there are other victims who say the same thing, to Tom's point, that if there are other victims who describe similar conduct, who also say he was smirking, so that it corroborates each other, that's one way it'll be more compelling. And the other way it'll be more compelling is if you, as you say, Joel, if the guy's foolish enough to smirk in court in front of a jury. And it's very hard for defendants sitting in a courtroom to behave themselves. This would be a long trial if it went to trial, right? You're talking about, we're saying 40, we don't know how many, but let's say 40 victims. That's a lot of testimony and other evidence and police officers and FBI and investigation.
Yeah. I mean, ballpark, sorry to cut you off. Ballpark, how long do you think a trial like this would last?
Couple months.
Okay. And by the way,
Wayne, what do you think?
I think maybe 6 months.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, you got at least 4 defendants and 40 victims.
Right. And actually you're not just trying to prove assault, you're trying to prove conspiracy. So we've got to get into all of that. It's not, it's not like that RICO trial that was going on for months and months and months and months, but it is complex. And so to sit there through all of that and, conduct yourself in front of a jury in a way that doesn't get you in further trouble is really hard.
Yeah. By the way, Rich, I should have asked you, Dwayne said maybe a 20-year deal. What do you think if the feds offered anything? I'm not sure that they're going to, especially on a high profile case like this, but what do you think would be appropriate from the feds, or what do you think they might offer?
I don't know for sure. I mean, I certainly don't know for sure. I mean, maybe just an opportunity for parole at some juncture, right? Like maybe, because when you think about it, when you think about what the alternatives are, that it's not going to be a death penalty case, I don't think. So they don't have to worry about that. So they're concerned about being in prison for life versus being in prison some lesser period. I would think 20 years would be real attractive if the evidence is as good as we're hearing and there are as many victims. Like, I'm not sure, I would maybe sign up for that deal pretty quickly. So I think to me, it would hinge on whether or not they had a possibility of being free someday.
By the way, whenever you hear a defense attorney say, well, there's no death penalty on the table, so they have that going for them. If that's like the best of it, that's pretty bad for these guys.
Gotta look on the bright side, Joel.
And Rich, you haven't been on the show before, but I'm terrified of prison. And by the way, I think we think like normal people, but if it's me and I'm in Japan, I'm not coming back. I'm running because I'm terrified of prison. But just goes to show, I don't think these guys are thinking the way the way we are. But to this point here from Ned Smith, our good friend, why are the feds, Tom, letting Japan brother take his time turning himself in? They said this a couple of days ago. Do they have any leverage or how does this go down behind the scenes? I know you're NYPD, but you work with FBI agents and marshals. What do these guys do to kind of make his trip go a little bit faster, that flight go a little quicker?
Well, you try to get as much information on it as you can, and you hope you get the manifest as, when the flight takes off as soon as you can, that he's on it. And then you wait for him at the airport. I mean, that's what they should be doing. I would not give this guy, when you land, get your stuff together and come turn yourself in. No. My team is sitting at that gate waiting for him. But you try to just get as much information on his traveling as you can. There's ways to do that. There's ways to, check the bookings, check the flights, check the seats, and all that. And hopefully they're doing that and not just leaving it up to him of when he decides to turn himself in. I wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, would they know like when he's boarding a flight in Japan and exactly where, when he's like, do they put something on the passport that flags them?
Well, you'll know that he's booked on a plane, and the way, unless things change, this is, going back a couple of years when I was working, usually get the manifest to who actually is on that plane about an hour, I think, after it takes off. By the time it gets commuted and it's all, in the system, that's what I remember, about an hour. So you'll know whether he's on it or not.
By the way, I don't know where I hope she's talking about the brothers and not me, but it's happened before from Debbie Blair. Side story here. We got a little side story, and that is Dwayne here. This is news that kind of came out today saying that there's an company, a brokerage. They're described as a white label brokerage that was affiliated with these guys' real estate company called Official. And they're saying now that these brothers have defaulted on a $4 million loan. Rich is shaking his head, so I'm going to go to him. But Dwayne, I mean, what's going on now that the business side of this is being affected? Are we going to see more of this? A lot of these guys, surprise, surprise, in Miami especially, but everywhere, they live, on debt, a lot of them. I'm not saying these guys aren't successful, but what does it tell you that now this company's coming out and saying, hey, you owe us $4 million?
Well, their financial lives and their business lives are burnt to the ground right now. I mean, they're done unless they have money squirreled away somewhere in offshore bank accounts, which I'm guessing they probably do. Their lives are basically burnt to the ground unless it's generational family money, that it would be kind of hard to get to that. But yeah, anybody that they owe money to right now are going to start calling loans. Okay, because I'm guessing they're not making their payments on anything right now, and cars are going to be repossessed, and loans are going to be called, and they're gonna burn them to the ground.
Yeah, it's Rich, I want you to weigh in on that on the financial side.
Yeah.
And by the way, in the remaining few minutes, STS Nation, pop in your triple Qs at the bottom of the chat. I'll go there, and if you have questions for the esteemed panel. And by the way, this is so sweet, says 40 victims should be 40 years at least, not quadruple that. But Rich, what about the financial issues now swirling around them? I imagine we're going to hear more about this in the coming days.
Well, I'm glad we're finally getting to the very important civil litigation questions in this case. So apparently these guys got sued for defaulting on a $4.6 million loan. And then the lender has moved for a preliminary injunction seeking what we call an asset freeze, saying that among other risks of all this criminal shenanigans is that the guys might leave and take their money with them. So you asked me before about getting an asset freeze in criminal court. I'm not really an expert on that, but in civil court, if you can show that the defendants are intentionally absconding with money that might be there to recover, in some circumstances, you can get either an asset freeze by injunction or an order of attachment. But these guys probably aren't paying anyone now because their whole world's falling apart. So why would they make a payment on a loan? It doesn't mean they don't have $4 million. Why would they give it to somebody else? They've, hoarding all their money wherever it is. They're going to stop paying anybody except hopefully lawyers. And they're going to have all sorts of litigation. They've got civil claims by the victims. They've got civil claims for money. They've got a federal criminal complaint and a state criminal complaint. That's a lot.
You could say that again. And I don't mean to laugh or make light of it, but these guys are, they're in it. And I'm not sure that they're getting out of it. And I don't think they probably should if they are guilty of these charges. Robin Millette, thank you for this. This part's a little difficult, and then I promise we're going to wrap up. But so, Tom, in the state charges, the victims talk specifically about gang sex and how the brothers would take turns and watch each other. So there's a question here. It sounds kind of incestuous. The brothers swimming naked. What's going on there? Because now we're getting into like the Diddy weird, where you've got your brother hanging out with you while you're doing this. I know you're a detective, but you're also a psychologist.
I play one on TV.
Yeah.
It's all part of it. It's all part of the good guy gang, garbage of look what we're doing. It's so cool. We're getting away with this. It just goes to this sick mindset that they have that this is a game and it's like playing on a playground, and it's not. You're talking about human beings. You're talking about women, and they don't care. I mean, flat out, they don't care. If you look at the details of some of these reports and statements that are out there, these guys don't care what they're doing to these human beings, how it's perceived, the crimes that they're doing. They don't. And that's a twisted mind, especially add on top of it that they either think it's cool and they're going to get away with it. And, daddy's going to get them off or someone's going to get them off their money or whatever. And that just makes it worse.
Yeah. And by the way, I mean, it's a very twisted game, but just to prove Tom's point, they have WhatsApp messages between these guys and unknown males, and can ask Dwayne about these unknown males. I think they're in trouble too, because they're going to figure out who they are. But this guy alone, the brother who's not in the red jumpsuit, said that there should be, and I quote here, a fee per bang and after bang. These are trips that they were planning to take with these women. And the other guy says that they're starting to collect Venmo for the girls' flights. So these guys were like ruthlessly planning this out, and it does sound like a pretty sick game to all of them. But back to evidence in a potential trial, Dwayne. This is interesting because none of us have heard about, as far as I know, about DNA tying them to these victims, and these go back. the allegations to 2010. What about that, Dwayne? I know obviously you're great at what you do, and you're gonna dive on that as a criminal defense attorney, saying, "Hey, look, there is no scientific proof of this."
Yeah, and that's a big deal. And there's not going to be any DNA. DNA degrades and goes away, okay, unless it was relatively recently that the incident happened. That they're not going to have much DNA. What they are going to have is these guys' digital footprints. You were talking about Venmo. WhatsApp's a little trickier to get messages off of, but but if there's Venmo payments to these guys for these things, it's going to be like a Diddy thing. Anybody in this orbit, is probably ducking for cover right now, because anybody in this orbit, you cannot function in this world without a digital footprint. And if your digital footprint is connected to the digital footprint of these brothers, you've got problems, and you better be watching out, because the feds want to round up as many people as they can, because the more people they get to roll on the top four, the better for them. So they're going to try to get everybody that's even slightly remotely connected to this, and they're going to pull them in, and they're going to have a talk with them.
Yeah, Becky, this is a good question. Why do they say just a decade? I think because they have victims, but there are people who are saying that this was going on in high school, which also has brought up the thought that maybe some of these victims are underage, like maybe they were 19, 20, and the girls were still in high school. That has not been corroborated. I don't think we know, at least publicly, if any victims like that have come forward. But Rich, we do know in these WhatsApp messages, at least so far, there's male number 1 and male number 2 who are working with these guys or helping them to coordinate these R parties. And obviously Dwayne just talked about getting them to roll, but do they know who these guys are? Like, do they have their identifications, and what's going to happen to these lovely gentlemen?
Right. So we don't know the answer to that, but my supposition is that investigators are talking to some other people, and some other people are being challenged to decide if they'd like to be witnesses or defendants, right? Are they going to roll, as Dwayne put it, or are they going to end up getting charged too? And also, we have something here that I think we potentially have in the Diddy case, which is there might be some people out there who are sort of a hybrid between victim and perpetrator, who committed some illegal acts, but also were sort of under the control of the defendants in a way that some might perceive as victims. What do we do with those people, especially if they cooperate, which I think would be the hope of the prosecutors? But I would imagine there's some discussion going on with other individuals and a lot of hard thinking about where people want to stand on this.
This comment from Bree dives out at me, Tom Smith. I'd like to get this is a public service announcement from NYPD detective. These men don't look like predators to me. And I put up these guys and these guys. What do you want to say? Our demographic is, majority women. What would you say to them? Because someone can be looks can be very deceptive.
Yeah, and you know what? 40 victims thought the same exact thing. And these guys banked on that. That's why they did what they did. And they dressed the way they are, and they put all these lavish things in front of them, because that's not the quote unquote, movie predator. And that's what they relied on. And, if it's the one thing I would say, if it's too good to be true, it's probably not true. So that's what, when you're confronted with people like this, that's what you have to consider. If it's too good, it's probably not good.
Yeah. By the way, I see 1 million people because the COE is teasing STS Nation. But in 2025, the plan is, and it's already in the works, we are taking a lot of our best guests. These guys don't know, but they'll be invited. And if they're interested, we're going to have them put a show of their own, because a lot of these guys have quote unquote real jobs, not like me. And, they're busy. But if they want to get a show, we are hosting them on a second channel, and I'm modeling it after Sports Talk Radio. It's going to be best talk in true crime, and it'll be everyone's own expertise in different subject areas. The first 2 people we have coming on Dr. Detective Troy Looney, who's an active detective out of Akron, Ohio, and the geoprofiler, who is an expert at finding missing persons. And they're going to do their own shows in those particular niches. So we will begin to wrap up here. Dwayne Cates, born in Wyoming, raised and born in Wyoming, but he is an Arizona criminal defense attorney and a very fine one. And you can tell he takes the United States Constitution quite seriously. Thank you, M. Furlong, for that. I appreciate it very much. Dwayne, you're these guys' criminal defense attorney. What are you telling them tonight? What are you saying to them?
Well,
the three of them call you and they say, "Get me the hell out of here." What are you saying?
Well, first thing I tell them is that you have the right to remain silent. Make sure you have the ability. Okay. Shut your mouth. Don't make phone calls. Don't talk to your family on the phone. Don't talk to anybody but me. And I'm on the way down there to talk to you. That's what I tell them.
And
by the way, and I would be happy to do a show. I do have a full-time job. Other than handling major felony cases, I also run a law firm, but I would be delighted to have a show.
Dwayne, we're going to have a conversation off air, but consider it done. And it's going to be a super cool channel, and got a lot of plans for it long term. It's not like we don't have enough. I could barely get through every day, especially breaking news has got. By the way, I've covered everything, but I've never really covered true crime. I covered politics, covered U.S. equities. Never knew there was so much breaking true crime news until I started doing this. But Fairy Glam psychologist. Wait, one of them's on a honeymoon. How did I miss that detail? The other two are married, and I think the other two are expecting babies any second. And this woman will probably be expecting a baby in about 9 months. Black Widower, thank you. Gifting 5 Surviving the Survivor memberships. Tom Smith, he is, as we say in New York, a mensch, and he is a retired NYPD, former counterterrorism guy at the NYPD, worked with the FBI, and a New Yorker through and through. This is why the NYPD is the best at what they do. Your final thoughts tonight, Tom. I guess my ask of you would be to sort of relay to the there are victims in our community who come here and they're brave enough to share their stories. What do you say to them when they see these stories and they start to trigger them? Do you have any words of advice?
You know what? Just be careful. Watch what you're doing, and just watch your back. Like I said before, really listen to people when you start meeting them and they start, approaching you and so forth. You got to be really guarded these days because people like these two feed on that vulnerabilities. They'll jump all over and flashing money and cars and trips and all that is enticing and sometimes blinds people. So you have to be aware of all that. And when it comes to this case, I would say, stay tuned because I think more victims are going to pop up. The more they see the comfort in the victims that are coming forward now, it gives them a little more strength to come forward and tell their story. So I don't think we're done with all this yet.
Yeah, but on that or in that same vein, Tom, and I know you don't know, but if you had to guess, like number wise, you think there's going to be another 10, another 20, these guys have been doing this for a very long time, and there's women everywhere.
Yeah, that's hard to answer. That really is, and it's scary and troubling that we can't answer that. That's the troubling one. That you the numbers might be beyond what any of us would even mention on this show, which is scary.
This is a super interesting question, Tom. Now that you're on a roll, I don't know if each of the men, because they're attorneys, but Tom, can you share a thought on how to better educate men? Because we're always talking about the women. I don't know if you have sons, but what would you say to men? I know you'd say to your son, "I'm going to kick your ass if you ever do this." But what do you say?
You know what? It's all in my mind. The way I was brought up, the way I raised my son, respect. It's just treat them like they're your sister, your wife, your mother, your grandmother. That's what you have to do, because what would you do if this was your family member? And you have to think of it that way. And it's all about respect.
Last but certainly not least, Rich, it took way too long. Got to get you back on. And Rich, by the way, I'm heavily debating if I go near Karen Reed for trial number 2. Part of me wants to leave it completely behind, but you and I can discuss that. I don't want to go back into that. I don't know what you call it, but Rich Schoenstein, he is a partner and vice chair, lest you think we do not have the best guests in all true crime. He is the vice chair of Tarter, Krinsky, and Drogan, very experienced trial lawyer and litigator, and has been handling civil disputes and all of that for the better part of 30 years. What's going on, Rich, behind the scenes at the SDNY, and your final thoughts?
Well, I think what's going on behind the scenes is continued investigation and building their case to make it as solid as possible to get a good outcome here, which is either some sort of plea agreement that makes sense or a victory at trial. My final thought is, I mean, I really liked everything that both of these guys have said, my fellow guests, but I think be careful to your audience. Predators don't look like predators. There's nothing a predator looks like. You can't, the predator is inside, not outside. So you don't know that looking at them. You'll never know that looking at them. It can seem like a perfectly nice guy. It can seem very attractive and still be a predator. And I love the question about educating men, because when I see a case like this, I'm embarrassed to be a guy, to tell you the truth. I mean, we stink to high heaven, and fellow men do a lot of really atrocious things. And I think it's because they're not educated, that they're not entitled to a damn thing. They're certainly not entitled to have a physical relationship with somebody just because they want it. And we have to find a way to better communicate that to our young people.
Very well said. And that is an amazing point, because we're always talking about, well, what do you tell these women? What do you tell these women? But it's also, what do you tell these guys? My son is too young to have that conversation yet at 5 years old. By the way, girl tried to kiss him the other day and he lost it. He started crying. And I told him, you're smarter than I thought you are. So we're keeping him away from these women. Dangers lurk on both sides of the aisle here. But obviously a serious topic, and appreciate these best guests. You got Tom, Dwayne, and Rich. Love you, America. We have no idea what we're doing yet tomorrow, but we'll let you know. Thursday, we're back on Luigi Mangione. He's back in court. There could be an extradition hearing, and then we're going to do a show about him. There's some weird stuff coming out about him now. We'll do a show in the evening about that. Friday, you've got Great Scott at your True Crime Phil with America's most respected detective, Phil Waters. We are running like 17 cable news outlets in one with 4 people. So kudos to the team. And we will see you tomorrow. Look for me on Twitter, Podcast STS, Instagram, Surviving the Survivor for show times. And we will see you tomorrow. Guys, stick around for 1 second.